This is Andy Mackenzie, and as days go, this one hasn't got off to too good a start. Although he won't be too interested in analysing it in detail, there is a common factor in each incident. Each one involved falls and falling objects. And although Andy has got off lightly, a recent survey by the HSE has shown that falls, including slips and falling objects, are responsible for nearly 70% of all industrial accidents, and a remarkable 44% of office accidents. A falling object can be anything from a small nut or bolt to a person. But even the smallest object can hurt if it's got sharp corners or edges, or falls from a considerable height. On the other hand, a smooth, rounded shape can cause harm if it's heavy enough, even though it might only fall a small distance. Obviously, the greater the height that something falls, the more time gravity has to accelerate it. Accidents involving falls and falling objects can vary considerably, from not much more than a scrape or bruise, through more serious injuries, to the possibility of someone being killed. There is legislation, the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, and the Workplace Health, Safety and Welfare 1992. Regulations that set out to protect people at work. But like all regulations, they're not worth anything unless they're acted upon. And people like Andy and his workmates take advantage of safety equipment and training. Let's take a look at some of the work practices that, if they're used, will keep people safe. It's obvious, but the first thing is to be wearing the right gear. That means a safety helmet and safety shoes as a minimum. Perhaps the most important thing is to avoid becoming a falling object yourself. People are killed and injured every year by falls, from ladders, from scaffolding, and you don't have to fall far to hurt yourself. If you're working more than 2 meters above the ground, then you must take precautions. If you need a ladder to get to where you're working, then it must be securely tied in. And if you're just using a ladder to work from for a short while, then you must get someone else to foot the ladder while you're on it. There's a best angle for a ladder. It's about 70 degrees, about 1 in 4, setting the foot of the ladder out 1 meter for every 4 vertically. The commonest cause of falls from ladders is overreaching. Don't be tempted, even if there's just a little job to do and you can almost reach it. Take the time to come down and reposition the ladder. For longer-term work, there'll be scaffolding, or there might even be a permanent working platform. But whichever structure is employed, you'll be protected by handrails or barriers that are referred to as fencing by the legislation. And remember that there should always be toe boards fitted, so that you don't inadvertently kick something off onto someone beneath. If you're going to be working at height for a short time, then there are fall arresters and safety harnesses to use. There's no point in having an arrestor unless it's securely attached to something that will take your weight if you fall. And if you wear a harness that's fitted wrongly, you may injure yourself anyway. If you're not sure, ask your safety officer or supervisor. When you're on scaffolding, don't be tempted to take shortcuts or get an extra little bit of height by climbing on the guardrail or handrail. So many accidents are caused when people try to save just a little bit of time. Don't do it. And of course, you shouldn't go on any scaffolding unless it's got a green scaff tag on it. And again, don't try modifying it yourself. Putting up scaffolding takes time and is expensive. So if you have to do a job somewhere that a crane can reach, you could use a personnel work basket. There are particular standards for these, so not just any basket will do. It's often very tempting to use a pallet on a forklift truck as a quick and easy way to gain height. It's also a quick and easy way to become a falling object when the forklift stops and you don't. You don't necessarily have to be at a great height to fall. You can always fall through a hole or into something, and it's especially dangerous if you fall into a tank containing a poisonous or corrosive substance, or even a solid but free-flowing material into which you could sink and suffocate. A high degree of protection is needed around tanks or pits where you might fall into a dangerous substance. And if a fence has to be removed for maintenance or some other reason, it's important that temporary protection is provided. Protection must also be provided if you make a temporary hole, in a deck grating for example. Always put a barrier around an opening if you have to leave it open, or cover it with wooden planks or a steel plate. And make sure that they're secure and are not going to be a trip hazard. Remember too that warning signs must always be posted. Although falls from a height happen more often than they should, it's more common for people to be injured by things falling on them. So what can you do to make sure it doesn't happen to you, even though there's not much you can do about passing seagulls? Being targeted like this is a great source of amusement for everyone, except the unfortunate victim. And luckily, Andy's pride is the only thing that's been hurt. But if this had been a spillage of a more toxic substance, things could have been much more serious. First of all, always wear the right gear, a helmet and safety boots or shoes. Then always be aware of the danger. If there are signs to keep you away from where people are working overhead, then obey the signs. Don't be tempted to take a shortcut. Be aware of cranes, of moving loads, of people working overhead, especially if you're under a mezzanine deck, which is likely to have open gratings. Although you can protect yourself to some extent from falling objects, it's much more important to make sure you aren't responsible for something dropping on someone else. Even though you've done something hundreds of times safely, it only takes a moment's lack of concentration for someone to get hurt. The commonest falling objects are hand tools. Putting tools in your pockets is a natural enough thing to do. But if you bend over, anything in your top pocket is going to fall out. And when you're climbing up a ladder or squatting down to pick something up, your trouser pockets will empty out. Don't use your pockets. Get a proper tool belt and keep your tools properly clipped and fastened in it. If you can't get a tool belt, then as a temporary measure, and that's all it is, you can tie your tools on, but obviously not too many, and make sure there's no chance that they'll get in your way or trip you up. When you're working, remember that tools or machinery parts can roll around and be kicked, or can be blown by the wind, so work tidily. And if you have to leave a job, then make everything secure, or take your tools with you. There's always the chance that something might get left inadvertently, and of course they won't have been secured, so it's especially dangerous. It's good practice for all the tools and equipment being taken aloft to be listed, so that they can be checked off at the end of the job, highlighting any missing items. Open grating floors are an obvious hazard. Tools or parts can fall through, and the chances are there'll be a walkway underneath. Remember, even small objects can cause serious injury, so take the time to get a sheet of cardboard or plywood to work on. One of the commonest causes of injury, to you or someone below, is something as simple as a spanner slipping off a nut. You're probably reaching a bit, you're putting some weight into it, and suddenly you're completely thrown off balance. You might fall yourself, but there's a good chance you're going to drop the spanner. So make sure the spanner, or any other tool for that matter, isn't worn and is the right tool for the job. Just one other thing about falling objects. In the wintertime in the North Sea, lumps of snow and ice can build up on a structure and can then be dislodged by the wind or by helicopter downdrafts. You can also get large lumps of solidified grease coming off the drill line, and if they fall the height of the derrick, then they're going to hurt. People can and do get hurt when stored materials fall on them because they haven't been stacked properly. Like most other things, it's a question of a little bit of thought and common sense, like banding or wrapping loads on a pallet, putting a sheet of cardboard on a pallet so that things can't fall through, and like having a height limit for stacks. The dangers of falling and falling objects don't end when you take your boiler suit off. Remember what we said at the beginning. 44% of accidents in the office are caused by falls, slips, and falling objects. And it doesn't make much difference to you if you get injured by falling at the worksite or back in the office. It's still going to hurt. Even filing cabinets can become serious hazards. If you leave the bottom drawers open, then someone can trip over them. And if you overload the top drawers, a whole lot can come over. And remember, a full filing cabinet is a considerable weight and has sharp edges. In fact, some of the commonest accidents in the office are just simple slips, trips or falls on the same level. And the commonest cause of slips is when somebody slips on something that someone else has spilled. It's so simple, isn't it? If you spill something, then clean it up, or get it cleaned up. A fall isn't a trivial thing. You could end up with an injured back, which could give you trouble for years and years. When it comes down to it, it's usually your fault for not taking care. When it comes to being hurt by falling objects, there's only so much you can do yourself to avoid it. You have to rely on the common sense and care of the people you work with. But if it's you that's working aloft, it means that the people you work with depend on you to take care. So, make sure you do.